Taiwan's former President Ma Ying-jeou is kicking off a visit to China, the first such trip by a former leader there since 1949. Ma says he will not meet with high-ranking Chinese officials and that his visit will be centered around communication and peace. The visit has sparked controversy in Taiwan, a territory that Beijing views as its own. And while former Taiwanese President Ma is on his way to China, current Taiwanese leader Tsai Ing-wen prepares for a visit to the U.S., which angers Beijing.
Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen reviews the troops ahead of a sensitive trip to the United States and Latin America. Tensions between Beijing and Taipei are at their highest point in decades. China is stepping up military and political pressure to force self-ruled democratic Taiwan into accepting Communist Party rule.
Protecting Taiwan and defending democracy has always been our military's great mission. I believe that only by continuously training and strengthening our war preparedness can we be even more able to protect our home and defend our country.
China has condemned the United States for allowing her to go, though her visit there is technically only a transit to and from Latin America. On her way home, Tsai is expected to meet U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in Los Angeles. China and Taiwan split in 1949 after a civil war won by the Communist Party, with the defeated Kuomintang nationalists fleeing to the island. Mainland China does not recognize Taiwan's independence and wants to formally unite it with the mainland. Tsai's visit coincides with a trip by her political rival Ma Ying-jeou, who is a former president and KMT member. Ma oversaw dramatic improvement in ties with China during his 2008 to 2016 rule, culminating in an historic meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in Singapore in 2015. Ma eventually left office under a cloud of controversy after a trade deal with the mainland failed to win approval amid the island's largest protests since the 1990s. Tsai succeeded him in office. Ma's planned visit comes as China's People's Liberation Army is sending fighter jets towards Taiwan on a near-daily basis, and as official communications between the two governments have ceased. Russia's war in Ukraine has cranked up fears in Taiwan of an invasion. Taiwan will hold a presidential election next year, with the KMT and Tsai Ing-wen's DPP the main political parties vying for the top post. Ma hopes his more conciliatory approach will help the KMT, which has lost the last two national polls.
And I'm joined now by Ian Chong, professor at the Department of Political Science at the National University of Singapore. He's an expert on international relations and China foreign policy. Mr. Chong, good to see you. So Taiwan's former president Ma Ying-jeou says the visit is not politically motivated. What's behind it then?
Well, that's his claim, but being a high-profile political figure, a former president, there will be a lot of political debate and attention centered on his visit. And Ma himself, while he is not going to meet any high-ranking Chinese officials, he does want to engage in dialogue with students, as he claims, in the PRC. Now, that, of course, for the PRC and the CCP is always going to be political. They see many things, in fact, all things, as sort of having a political tinge to it.
Yeah, he says he hopes to bring about peace. There must be a political side to it, doesn't there? Ma's trip stirs up huge controversy in Taiwan. Some are worried it might send the wrong message at the wrong time. What's your assessment?
Right. So the thing is with Ma Ying-jeou, he's been known to be very Beijing friendly. And at this point in time, what we are seeing is that Beijing is adding a lot of military pressure from exercises near Taiwan. They're putting pressure economically on Taiwan. And so there is concern that Ma's visit sends a signal of weakness or capitulation toward the PRC. And but Ma, of course, claims that it's for peace. So this sort of two sides of the debate really are creating the controversy around this particular visit.
This is a historic visit. Why do you think he chose to go there, and why do you think he chose to go there now?
So Ma's official reason is that he's going to pay respects to his ancestors who come from Hunan in China. Now, I guess his move now is to show that he is still a influential political player. This comes at a time when the KMT is trying to figure out their candidates for the presidential election. So I suppose Ma is trying to leave an imprint that forces the debate in Taiwan to move towards some sort of conciliation toward Beijing.
How is this all being received in Beijing?
Beijing, it's sort of awkward because they don't recognize the government in Taiwan. They don't recognize Ma's presidential status, but yet I think they don't want to, overtly sort of reject it. So they've allowed him to visit. How they're going to handle his visit has remained a question. There's been questions over his security detail. So I suppose Beijing is trying to handle it as in as smooth a way as possible. But bear in mind, Beijing also has other major visits at this point in time. The Europeans are going, the Singaporeans and the Malaysians are also going for Boao Forum. So I think in China, Ma's visit will probably not get very much of an airing.
Mm-hmm. But Ma's visit to China is very likely to overlap with the Taiwanese president, with Tsai Ing-wen's trip to the U.S. Is that just a coincidence?
So I think there may be some reason why there's overlap, but it's not possible to know from the outside. So maybe Ma wants to shift the focus away from Tsai, but all that is not completely known at this point. It's not something that Ma has stated out openly.
Ian Chung from the National University of Singapore. Thank you so much for those very interesting insights.
Thank you.
All right, let's get more context on this from DW correspondent William Yang in Taipei. William, would it be a stretch to say that for the longest time, Taiwan has been the Kuomintang and the Kuomintang, Taiwan?
Well, Birish, I think that's a very good way of summarizing the history of Taiwan. When we look at the KMT retreated from China to Taiwan after the Civil War in 1949. For decades, Taiwan was really under its iron fist rule and it's a one-party authoritarianism until the late 80s and the early 90s when finally Taiwan took the decision and transitioned into a full-fledged democracy. We have to remember that Taiwan's first democratic presidential election was only held in 1996. That wasn't even that long ago. So it is correct to say that for all the decades before 1996, Taiwan was basically under the control of this one party. And this one party definitely still has a lot of legacy and also baggage, but at the same time influence over Taiwan's politics.
And you would think that a party that fought the communists in China would be avowedly against relations with Beijing, but that's not been the case always, has it?
Yeah, exactly. Ever since the presidential election in 1996, and then there was the first power transition in 2000, we started really seeing the KMT position themselves as this party that still has a lot more connections and also the ways and the, I think, means to just communicate and held exchanges with the Communist Party. I think one of the reasons is because the original goal of the KMT is to retake and reclaim China. And at the same time, the Democratic Progressive Party, which is the current ruling party, has always featured and present themselves as this Taiwan independence movement and Taiwan independence party. So that is why I think when we look at the KMT being positioned inside Taiwan's own context, they are the defender of the Republic of China and the representation of the identity of China rather than the identity of this very new and young democracy of Taiwan that the current ruling party DPP represents.
So when a former Taiwanese leader like Ma Ying-jeou from the Kuomintang visits China, what is the signal it sends out to Beijing?
I think the signal is twofold. The signal to Beijing is basically that the KMT still has good wills and they still think and consider relationship and dialogue and exchange with the Communist Party as very, very important to their overall political agenda and their political survival here in Taiwan. So that is basically, in a way, if not kowtowing, it's the KMT trying to hand out the olive branch and hoping that Beijing is going to respond with some sort of favor And some of the experts have already warned that the KMT and Ma Ying-jeou could potentially be walking into the trap that was set up by Beijing, because the China now is very different from the China that Ma Ying-jeou had to deal with when he was still in power between 2008 and 2016. This is a much more ambitious and much more heavy-handed and confident China. So in a way, a lot of the terms of the exchanges will have to be made by Beijing, and the KMT and Ma Ying-jeou could only follow those terms, and then basically from there on have any sort of a dialogue that's being set and dictated by Beijing.
There's naturally been a lot of interest behind this visit. Stay with us on the line, William, as we hear what Taiwanese themselves have been saying about it.
Ma, or his party, is relatively pro-China, so I'm not surprised he's going to visit China.
When the Kuomintang party was in power, the people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait interacted very often. But in the past 8 years, when the Democratic Progressive Party was in power, you can see that everything has been frozen. Also because of the pandemic, Taiwan's economy is suffering. I don't know if Ma's trip will ease relations, but at least the people on both sides of the strait can interact more, and that's good. Obviously, tensions between Taiwan and China are rising now, so I don't think it's a bad thing that Ma travels to China.
William, I think the question on everyone's mind is, why is Ma Ying-jeou traveling to China right now?
I mean, on the surface, of course, he's trying to present this as a way for him to pay tribute to his ancestors because his family is coming from China. But I think deep down, this is in fact a very calculated political game. We know that Taiwan is only 10 months away until the next presidential election, and the KMT is desperately trying to separate itself and find a very unique footing on the issue of cross-strait relations. And so this is a chance for the KMT to present themselves as a party that's still capable of interacting and have dialogue with Beijing, and they can present themselves as this agent of peace rather than, and then while at the same time frame the ruling party DPP as the party that's only going to bring war or conflict to Taiwan.
You have a majority of polls in Taiwan, and they have continuously indicated that people have a not too favorable view of Beijing, especially when it comes to the last few years. So when it comes to China, what exactly is the KMT's pitch?
I think the KMT's pitch right now is basically that they are the party that can still maintain status quo, ensure that Taiwan's way of life is not going to be affected by a more emboldened and also a more ambitious Beijing. Because of the last few years, especially over the last year, we see a lot of the military provocation and also military exercises around Taiwan by the People's Liberation Army. And they are basically going to use this trip as a way to tell or try to convince the Taiwanese public that they are the party that is not going to continue to create this kind of tension with Beijing. But at the same time, rather, there might be more economic benefits and at the same time more prosperity and just, basically bringing back the status quo that they consider has been missing since 2016 when the current president Tsai Ing-wen came to power.
Does the KMT truly believe that this visit will have an impact on ties between Beijing and Taipei?
I think, honestly, they are more aiming for the purpose and the result of this trip for the domestic audience. I think deep down they understand how now Beijing is the one that's really going to be picking and choosing the partner that they want to work with in Taipei. And so far, basically, in Beijing's mind or in Xi Jinping's mind, none of the political party fully, I think, tick all the boxes of the ideal partner over here in Taipei. So what they can only do is to try to present this as at least they get some meetings with Communist Party officials and use this to amplify the message and try to frame themselves as this party that is going to continue to bring Taiwan forward in the international community without creating all the chaos and war, and at the same time accusing the ruling party DPP as this party that's having too close a connection and relationship with Washington, and then that's going to only trigger and anger Beijing further. As we know that the current president Tsai Ing-wen is due to be traveling to Central America and making a stop in LA and meeting the current U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and that meeting and trip is likely going to also be a source for the framing over here for Ma Ying-jeou and also the KMT.
Trips to China for domestic consumption in Taiwan. Thanks very much for bringing us that context. William Yang in Taipei, thank you so much.